Welcome to Plants to Plants, the hemp processing seminar series. I am Emmett McGregor, CEO of Sci-Fi Systems. We have a guest host with us today, Catherine Sidman, who is the sales director of carbon chemistry, as well as the host of the podcast. Is it Chat with Sidco, Cat?
Oh, you
That's right.
got it. You
And
got it.
not to be confused with Chat with Cat of Kitty
Crazy
Cat
cat
fame.
lady. Different thing.
And Catherine has many years in the cannabis industry through various sales and consulting roles as well as production. You want to give us a brief summary of your background, Kat, and then we can move forward with the conversation.
Thank you, Emmett. I'm so excited to be here working with you and Edwin over the last years. It's just a special part of my work life, and this is exciting. I sold equipment in my career, laboratory equipment to aerospace, electronics, pharmaceutical, and transitioned to cannabis in about 2010, 2000, right about there, 2010. Went to my first High Times Cannabis Cup, and I was like, forget pharma. These are my people. I love it. I love the industry. I'm a consumer. I'm an enthusiast. I'm not an extractor. I sell the gear. I sell filtration media, support the industry with my career and my dollars. And a special shout out to any cultivators. Without cultivators, this is an agricultural product that you and I have the benefit of building our careers and our companies around. Without the farmers and the cultivators, where would we be? So shout out to the farmers and the cultivators. And I love making beautiful extracts.
Thanks for that introduction. Today we have a very special show because we're going to have a two-part show. Kat will actually be hosting. We'll start it off with a conversation between myself and Kat, and then we'll move on. And I see Jason Lupoi has also just joined us, and we'll do an in-depth introduction for him at the middle of the show, and we'll get started now. So, Kat, you're running this. Where would you like to start? Critical topics for the industry today.
You know what? There's so many things that we can talk about, and I feel like the industry is. It doesn't matter when we have these conversations. We can always start by saying the industry is at such a critical point. The industry is at such an exciting point. The industry is on the cusp of. The industry is recovering from. There's always something because we're so new. And what's fascinating to me, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, is that we have some markets that are so mature. I'm thinking California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado. And then we have markets that are just getting started. And it's fascinating to me from a consumer perspective, what they want to see. Like there's places where we're still, all there is shatter. We haven't even gotten to sauce yet, And then there's, as the markets mature and the consumer preference matures, it's so dynamic. And across the United States, just that one part of the cannabis industry in the US, it's so dynamic. What do you hear from your customers, Emmett, as they go to build out a lab? Are you hearing from customers in more mature markets? Are you hearing more from customers in new emerging markets? What products do they want to make? What SKUs do they want to put on the shelves? All of that is so interesting to me.
Well, there's definitely a contrast between the two. We do work with both, startups or companies that are entering into newer markets as well as well-established operations in the more mature markets. And the difference that we're really seeing there is that the mature markets, the focus is always on scale up and reducing operating expenditure from existing operations. So it's a lot of coming in with new and innovative technologies to fill the bottlenecks in their existing processing lines. And we see more often than not, those are focused on areas like filtration, dewaxing, and solvent recovery. The extraction tends to scale pretty similarly across all the markets, although we do see increasing demand for automation on the extraction side, especially on the hydrocarbon extraction side for the mature markets. So again, that's driving towards more efficiency, less man hours, more larger production capacity. On the smaller and the emerging markets, even if the emerging markets are actually quite large and well established, um, or well-established consumer bases that have yet to be addressed. We often see operators trying to start small, dip their toes into the market, and have this plan for steady growth and growing their equipment portfolio as they go. We actually try and tell those operators to plan ahead based on projected demand. Because we've seen it time and time again that folks that hold back their operations and start too small lose the race to the big operators. The biggest thing that I see in the emerging markets right now that's really impacting especially startup businesses is the consolidation of the MSOs. I mean, we're seeing multi-billion dollar equity deals for these large companies like Curaleaf and like Columbia Health and the varieties, Green Thumb. Some of these bigger MSO operators are now they're in 20 states plus. They're starting with retail, grow and extraction, processing, and as well as products manufacturing across the board. They're trying to consolidate supply chain and unify supply chain across every state that they're in. And to be able to compete with those operators, really, even in brand new markets, our biggest advice is start thinking like you're in a mature market from day one. That's the biggest trend because these large MSOs, they're going to start their business in exactly the same way that they started in their mature markets. They're bringing that into new markets from day one. And so you have to stay with the current trends of efficiency and low OPEX because we see, although in markets like Michigan, markets like Illinois, we still see very high dollar value for the oil products, the extract products. We also see faster and faster price drops back to closer to a national average of price points because scale up is happening quicker and quicker from the time that a new market opens up to the time that products are hitting the shelves.
I think that that's really, really vital advice for people is you're not building a business to be in business today. You're building a business to be in business tomorrow. And what does tomorrow look like? I don't know, but I know that it looks a lot more like GMP than it looks like anything else, right? I can make those kind of assumptions. And I think case in point would be our friends in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has what I have referred to as the spelling bee model. So in a spelling bee in a class, you remember in like third grade, everybody has to get up and stand in front of the class and you try to spell your word. And if you can't spell it, you go, and you're like me, and you can't spell that word, you go sit down at your desk. And then once there's like the two best spellers in the third grade in Mrs. Smith's class, they go with Mr. Rogers' class. And then the four best third grade spellers match up. And then pretty soon after everybody in the school tried, we have the best spellers in the school and they're going to the county spelling bee, right? That was kind of what Oklahoma did. Oklahoma gave everybody a shot. All the kids could spell a word. You had $2,500 and you could fog a mirror and you had a barn that you could put a closed loop in. You were in business in Oklahoma for a minute. Now you need a C1D1 booth. Now you need a liquid petroleum license, special training, special license, special certification, unique to Oklahoma, not in any other state. You need to be in metric now. So that's how they're doing the spelling bee. They let everybody participate. And I kind of like it as crazy as the market is there, as much as there is a lack of required testing. The good companies are doing it because they know they should. As much as there's a lot of chaos and noise in the market, everybody had a shot at it. Now the mistake I think some companies make is they do pretty well at the spelling bee and they get out of the third grade and they even beat some kids in the fourth grade. And next thing you know, they're the best speller in the whole class. And they get a little hot about it. And they think, well, I'm the best speller at my elementary school. I'm going to county. I'm going to knock this bitch out. Right. They don't. They get their lunch eaten by a sixth grader who's got this figured out since traditional market days in California. Sorry to mix the metaphor there. We're not spelling anymore, but you see what I'm saying. So I get these Oklahoma operators are like, we're doing great here. I had a guy tell me in Florida when I was in Miami, we're doing so great in Miami. We're ready to go national. And I'm like, oh, honey, that's the worst thing for you right now. I think that's a tension that's really real in this industry, Emmett. And I feel it in my personal life. I feel very strongly that no one should be in jail for this plant, and that criminal justice reform is important and it is necessary and it's vital. People are dying in jail, rotting in jail for this plant, and I want that fixed. People need checking accounts. People need banking. People need to file their taxes like any other normal business and not have those artificial constraints. I mean, checking accounts, all the cash we have to deal with, it's not safe, it's not secure, they're not able to use their money. I feel passionately about those things. And I'm not ready for federal legalization yet because too many businesses making fire product will be gobbled up by the consolidation in the market. And that's a tension that I'm constantly feeling. You know, I look at the legislation that's being turned over to the Senate right now, and it's pukey pants. But could it get somebody out of jail? Like, I'm for that. And I don't want my selfish desires to get in the way of that. But it's not great legislation. So that was all my roundabout way of getting back to what you were saying about looking at scale. You know, look at scale, but be glad that you're in this state tight compartment and that small ecosystem. Like, you may be competing against Cresco, right? They might be in your state, but you're not competing against Cresco. Like, if it was national market, forget about it. It would be really hard for a lot of our customers to stay in business.
And I think that the key thing when you're looking at that sort of national scale up that people keep thinking is 2 years away, which it will be 2 years away until something changes in the Senate, right? And the craft beer model to me looks like the most viable sort of model for the cannabis industry to mirror.
Sure.
And the key thing about the craft beer model was that small operators consolidated regional distributorships, right? So you had loyalty, brand loyalty from quality product, quality first, small batch ingredients leading to small batch products, and basically building the entire business model off of high quality leading to brand equity and to loyalty among a specific consumer base. And that same model can carry over to a national market in cannabis. But the problem that the industry is seeing right now is that there is no uniform price acceptance, right? And the variability in the cost of the feedstock makes it so that the price point and the profitability of a given product is not dependable, right? So a great example right now, and I think that this is where we're going to start to see more and more differentiation between the craft industry and the mass market industry, or if you will, that's dominated by the MSOs, and that's live resin cartridges.
Sure.
You know, this is a premium mass consumer product now. It's being produced in large volumes. It is capitalizes on a higher price point, generally speaking, but the quality differentiation between a very well manufactured product and something that meets the product designation but lacks in the ingredient quality can be easily observed by the customer, right? And the key thing there is it's all about supply chain. It's relationships between cultivators and extractors, and that's what differentiates the craft extraction market, is really the working relationships between craft cultivators that can maintain an extremely high quality profile and are willing to sell that high quality material to exclusively to the craft manufacturers of extract products, and that long-term business, mutually beneficial business relationship between those. And sometimes that looks like a vertical integration. And in some markets, it's sort of required to be a vertical integration. But more often than not, it's an informal business arrangement built on trust relationships. And so for these new markets coming online with small numbers of licenses, and especially the ones where there are social equity licenses that are specifically intended to fill smaller regional niches, I would urge those operators to focus on quality, to focus on building an integrated business model between cultivators that are going to potentially have a higher cost of feedstock going into extraction, but that will be able to command a higher dollar for high quality biomass, and also focus on strains that are specifically tailored towards yielding good quality extract. And that is another, so I think, undervalued critical trend in the market overall is this idea now of cultivating specifically for extraction and breeders starting to produce varietals that are optimized for extraction and
optimized for different kinds of extraction, Emmett. So let's talk about what washes well. I'm hanging out with the heady boys who make my favorite product, which would be a little bit of pressed bubble hash. That's my fave. And the rosin guys are talking to me about the difference in the cuticle, the difference in the trichome structure, the difference in the plant that makes it a good washer or not. And is it possible that some strains are great in a joint and some strains are great for BHO and some strains are better for ethanol wash? Like, we're getting to that place. And I think for two reasons, because the market is maturing and we're all dialing it in. But Emmett, we have to dial it in. These sort of optimizations, this sort of specialty on growing a cultivar because it yields well for a low yielding product like bubble hash, or, water hash, which I'm not calling solventless, you'll notice. They can take that up with me later. But when we talk about that kind of specialization, right? It's because we have to, because the margins are razor thin. The market is smart. And at this point, I'm seeing a lot of customers who, like you said, are scaling up or optimizing. I think that that's the move for a lot of existing businesses that have been around, even in mature markets. Now it's about looking at your quality systems, boring business stuff, reviewing your quality, seeing where there are bottlenecks, seeing where there's waste. Is there time waste? Where is product resting? You talked about winterization, which has always been, we can run through BHO quick. We can run through that all day long. But then we're sitting in a -80 freezer in jars overnight or for 2 days. Like, what's going on, Emmett? How that's a specific bottleneck that I think Sci-Fi Systems can work with.
Absolutely. And we use membranes for dewaxing in our ethanol processes. We have an ongoing project relating to dewaxing in hydrocarbon. But the other fact of the matter with hydrocarbon is if you have your processes dialed downstream, you can produce a high quality distillate from even non-winterized hydrocarbon extract fairly effectively, and much more easily than you can with a non-dewaxed, non-winterized ethanol extract, for example, because it's not picking up some of those contaminants that are the most troublesome in the distillation process. But the other side of it is, of course, the sauce market and this live resin market it's a method of saying we want to provide the same form factor, the vape cartridge, but we don't want to have to go through the distillation process. So there's a lot of different methods for approaching the same form factor of consumer sort of interaction with the product. And I think we'll see more and more of that kind of approach where these things that are taken for granted as being necessary can actually be eliminated in process development. An example of this is things like brine washes, things like liquid-liquid type separations that we're starting to see come into the industry to eliminate the need for certain solid medias or the need for doing distillation, because if you process in midstream well enough, you can actually produce a high quality output product that doesn't need to be decarboxylated, for example. Seeing increased, especially on the hemp side, a lot of increased interest in acid form cannabinoids for edible consumption in particular and for topical applications. On both of those sides, this is a process development challenge that can be addressed partially by hardware, but also needs sophisticated process developers and chemists and chemical engineers in the field, in the operations of these companies that are trying to focus on those new product lines. And so that's another critical component of shifts within the industry is I think more expertise coming from truly academically trained chemists, chemical engineers, and cross-pollination between other botanical processing fields into the cannabis industry in a way that has happened sort of piecemeal in the past. But now that the big MSOs are really bringing big dollars to play in the industry, more people are willing to come in, at least on a consulting basis. And smaller companies can access that same consulting base, but they have to be willing to reach out into academic circles. We reach out into professional networks focused on chemical engineering and botanicals processing and access some of those more sophisticated technical advisors that can really bring a big benefit to your companies.
And something that I've seen, and this is a good time for me to say that until all those innovations come that get rid of the need for solid media, carbon chemistry is your preferred media provider. So
sure.
just want to slip that in there. But one of the things,
and it's not going away entirely. I don't think so. You know,
well, I mean, they haven't figured out how to make it go away in edible oil and other things. So I think it'll be around for a while. I want to give a shout out at this point to your point to the American Chemical Society for having a cannabis subdivision. Really, I'm really thankful that the American Chemical Society has a cannabis subdivision. Some of you might not think that's a big deal. It's a big deal. This is where every professional chemist goes to their seminars, and they all break out into their little subsets. You know, there's people who just talk about paint all day long and pigments and polymers and all sorts of things, but now we can go talk about cannabis. And so we're getting attention of really smart people. Also, ASTM D37, the work that ASTM is doing is phenomenal. They have a cannabis subdivision. They're working on important things like packaging, processing, equipment, certifications. So these are places where super smart people, engineers, chemists, physicists are all getting together and talking about cannabis, and it's elevating us and it keeps moving us forward. And, there's very little novel equipment in a cannabis lab, and nor should there be. I mean, that was really the problem. Like in the dark ages of cannabis extracts in the early 2000s, and obviously hash has been around for thousands of years. I'm talking more about solvent-based extracts. In those dark ages, it was what equipment could you buy on eBay? What equipment could you sort of repurpose, figure out? Interesting story at that in the mid like 2005, right around that time, the semiconductor industry transitioned from oil pumps to dry pumps. It was a really big deal if you worked in semi. I was in the Portland area, obviously Intel's headquarters. At that same time, when extracts were starting to be popular in cannabis, there was a million, those Edwards 28. They're Edwards 30 now, but Edwards 28 pumps, right? And cannabis standardized around this pump because there were a billion of them that had been well maintained at Intel and other semicon companies, and they were all available on the used market. So then when people were able to actually buy pumps, they would go and they would buy an Edwards 30 because it's what they knew. It was fundamentally the wrong pump. There are very few applications in a cannabis lab where an oil pump of that size, an oil pump that's spewing disgusting mist all the time, even when you have that little filter on it, it is, I promise. There's very few applications for that in a cannabis lab. And yet it is arguably what the industry standardized around because it's what we had access to. I think that tells us a lot about what we're using, and we need to critically question. If you have a cannabis lab and someone tries to sell you something or you're buying the thing, having an advisor, if you don't have that knowledge yourself, spending a little bit of money and having an advisor who can critically look at the equipment and say, maybe this is right, maybe it isn't, maybe this isn't the perfect solution. I think that those things are really important. And that's part of cannabis coming into its own. Like you're saying, we're having access now to much more equipment, and it's equipment that's available. And I'm so excited that Jason is here because he'll be able to speak to how CO2 equipment is used at scale across many, many industries that are in our lives every day. Like cannabis didn't come up with this shit, you guys. We're trying to bring it in to our fold. And frankly, we have enough to do just to get the trichomes into my Puffco. Like that's the ultimate goal here, people, is getting those trikes into my body. We have enough work to do without trying to invent specialized equipment for cannabis. But if you are going to look at specialized equipment for cannabis, look at my friend Scientific 710, because they come up with some really innovative little upgrades and adjustments to standard equipment that really nail it for our industry.
And that's where it is, even on the light hydrocarbon extraction, it's not correct to say that cannabis was the first application, not the first mass application. It was
decaffeinating coffee with butane,
right, and asphalt
CO2
work and all kinds of things that were done with butane, and yes, and CO2, of course, with an even much longer track. Well, arguably about the same length of track record, but a much better established track record in the 80s and 90s. But the specialization of these tools to the specific chemical profile of the cannabis plant, and that integration again between process and hardware, and finding where the workflow optimization points are. That's why we love working with Scientific 710 as well. It's really about where are the pain points, focus on the pain points, how do we improve these?
Right.
And that same mentality within your business operations, where you can see where are the pitfalls, what's hanging up our operators, what is hanging up our buyers about our product, how do we address those? And where's the least effective, least efficient point in our process? How do we focus on improving that first and eliminating the bottlenecks? If I could give people any advice, it's internally, but also interfacing with external vendors and external consultants. Focus on those specific points that are holding you back most, and take a procedural, step-by-step process of identifying and eliminating bottlenecks within your business. And it's worth paying more to eliminate them up front, because you're going to be paying for them for years out into the future, with those oil-based vacuum pumps being a great example. Of you're paying for the oil replacements, you're paying for the labor to replace the oil, you're paying to have to rebuild the pumps more frequently. If you just bought a more expensive dry pump from day one, you would eliminate a lot of that downtime and a lot of that ongoing cost, even though it appears, it costs a little bit more upfront. The savings are well worth the change over.
With the vacuum pump question, I replaced a lot of Edwards 30s with a little teeny tiny Welch pump. It was like the size of a shoebox, and it cost $1,000. And I loved it for vacuum oven applications. No more muffining, because muffining's not your friend. That's terrible technique. If you're muffining extracts, hit me up in the DMs, because it's fun to watch. Like, you can have a special vacuum oven and you can muffin all that stuff and like eat cereal and watch that if that's entertaining to you, but it's terrible practice. It's terrible practice. So I replaced it with a little tiny little my little putt Welch pump, and sold 1 billion of those. And it only goes down to absolute vacuum is 1 torr. THC volatilizes below 1 torr. So arguably you're retaining terpenes, you're retaining cannabinoids, quiet, less expensive, dry, no oil, and it didn't cost more. But the cost of it was changing your mind. And for a lot of cannabis operators, that's a real expensive deal. Is some lady telling you that that's the wrong pump. when you're really proud of your lab. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest challenges. And I'm sure that you run into this as well, is that people are really proud, and they should be. They should be. They're proud of what they've built. They made those decisions on what they thought was a good thing. And somebody coming in and going, that's not the way, it's not fun.
Yeah, yeah. If they do the internal work first to recognize the things they don't like about the workflow that they've implemented, and then think, how do I solve this problem? And they come to solution providers with that, self-knowledge of what's been irritating them, they'll have a much better time of finding good solutions rather than taking it as, I know what's best, and yet they still know there's something wrong.
Eat a handful of mushrooms, leave the ego at the door, and let's optimize your lab, because that's what we want. We want you to make money. We want you to be in business a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. We want there to be a bidding war for MSOs trying to buy your company and buy your brand. And we want you to be happy taking the money or happy telling them to fuck off. We don't care. We want you in business making money. That's our whole point. Emmett doesn't make any money selling expensive equipment to people that doesn't work. He makes money selling expensive equipment to people and selling solutions because it spurs on their business, and they keep coming back and they tell other people about it. We're here for the long haul. Everybody on this call has been in the game for more than a minute, and we're still here because people recognize the fact that we're not selling snake oil. We're not trying to rip anybody off. We're not trying to be sneaky about it. We're just telling you what we know and offering the solutions that we think are best.
Well, on that note, why don't we introduce Jason?
I'd love that. Do I introduce? Am I the host now?
You're the host now.
That's exciting. Jason Lupoi is a fantastic guy. I have been giving him crap about CO2 extraction for a long time, and he just keeps doing it better and better all the time, to the point that I'm now pretty in love with Thar Process and what they have to offer. Jason is the editor of Terpenes Testing magazine, and I have had the pleasure of speaking with him on the road and working with him over the years. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kat. Hey, Emmett. Thanks for having me.
Jason, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
All right. So I didn't know we were allowed to swear, so maybe I will.
Oh, shoot. Are we not allowed to talk on it? The Sunday school teacher came in hot.
You had me eating a handful of mushrooms too. But so I graduated from Iowa State University with a Ph.D. in analytical chemistry. While I was there, I found that I had a real affinity for working with plants. A lot of the work I did was on renewable energy applications, and fast forward a few years, I did a couple of postdoctoral appointments at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab, all kind of under that renewable energy theme. I had the opportunity to work with a world-renowned plant geneticist at the University of Queensland named Robert Henry. I got to go there and hold a koala, which was pretty awesome.
Do they hug you back? Is it what it
that?
looks like when you hug a koala? Do they hug you back? Is it like that?
Yeah, they've got their arms and legs kind of wrapped around you. I had a fresh one. They hadn't been handled throughout that day, and she was kind of pawing at my goatee, which was kind of cool. Like, she noticed something different about me, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
But, all of my research was really revolving around renewable energy and how we could use plants for supplanting, non-renewable energy forms like fossil fuels. And so CO2 was
Jason,
always
could you hurry up? Could you please hurry up with that? Because we could really use that right now. Like, specifically, I pay $6.20 a gallon for gas in Northern California. So if you could just set aside the cannabis for 6 to 12 months and get that shit handled, we all thank you in advance.
Well, the National Renewable Energy Lab's been working on that for a long, long time. And I think that we all kind of realized that, bioethanol was probably not something downstream in the future, but we started to kind of look at bio-based materials and kind of looking at how we could reduce fossil fuel consumption in that regard. But CO2 was always a useful villain for us, always kind of a demon that we would point to because we were trying to quell the CO2 that was being emitted by industry and processes like that. And so I've come to some kind of weird full circle where now CO2 is, kind of the superhero that is stepping in, and it's not CO2 that's generated, it's CO2 that we're capturing from industrial processes and putting to greater good on Earth. And so we're doing a lot of, it's just kind of interesting how my background always has kind of navigated around CO2. And here I am doing CO2 stuff at Thar. As you mentioned, I am the editor-in-chief of Terpenes and Testing magazine, so I've been doing that since January of 2018. It's been a fun experience. I've done a variety of different things within the industry, but I think some of the main things that I'm proud of is I got to write a book called The Cannabis Terpene Experience, and the research leading up to that book was pretty compelling for me. I was pretty skeptical of things like aromatherapy, but reading the research that's already been done on terpenes, and there's a wealth of that literature out there, and how terpenes can help in a wide array of different medical conditions was pretty interesting to me. And I also I once was teaching analytical chemists about cannabis science in the back of a Chinese restaurant where they did their karaoke, and that sprung into an opportunity to teach senior citizens about cannabis. And these are people that have grown up with decades worth of reefer madness nonsense. And I relished at the opportunity to kind of set the record straight and share with them some cannabis science. And we had a medical doctor there to answer all their medical questions, and a lawyer as well to kind of framework the legality. So those are just kind of some of the highlights of how I've been involved in the cannabis industry. And by day, I am the director of laboratory operations here at Thar Process in Pittsburgh.
So let's talk for a minute, because I love my BHO and I love my BHO people, right? And one of the things, CO2 has always been there. CO2 machines have been there, and the people that are committed to CO2 are so committed. And I'm thinking about Evolved Extracts in Oregon, early adopter of CO2. I'm thinking about Frog Mountain in Alaska, and these CO2 processors that they wouldn't have it any other way. But there are challenges with CO2 processing. What are some of the challenges that a CO2 processor will face?
Well, Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. I think the number one thing that I've heard, both in a former role of being editor-in-chief of Extraction magazine and here at Thar, is upfront costs. And that's definitely a challenge for some folks that may have a limited budget. But I think often just looking at that sticker price is pretty short-sighted. And you were talking about people wanting to be in the industry for longevity. And I think when you start to look at things like total cost of ownership, the situation changes. We've done a lot of those calculations with some of our equipment, not just CO2 extraction equipment, but CO2-based purification equipment, preparative chromatography. And when you compare to other techniques like flash chromatography or HPLC, you start incorporating solvent usage, you start incorporating consumables, waste material, things like that. Then you start to see a change in the situation over time. And if you look out 5 years from now, if you plan on being in the industry in 5 years, which is, in this industry seems like an eternity, but is also a short period of time. I think that starts to change the situation, and it might be that initial sticker price is, over time doesn't hit as hard.
That's really a good point, is the CapEx versus OpEx. And we need to look at that. And again, slow down. We're going to plan the work and then work the plan. We're going to go slow in the beginning so we can go fast later on. And those are some of the considerations that I think are really important. And where's another place where CO2, and I also want to shout out Ohm Extracts in Southern Oregon, fire medicine for people. CO2, also using CO2. One of the things that where I feel like CO2 equipment really hits a sweet spot. And this goes back to something Emmett was mentioning, is when we're talking about scale, we're seeing companies want to scale, and we have a ceiling with solvent, with flammable solvent. We have a ceiling with BHO, and the ceiling is driven by, and even if you're in a hazmat building with a hazmat designation, now that's a zoning, that's a property zoning question. It's nothing you can build, it's nothing you can do. It's what the jurisdiction says. This is the occupancy, this is the zoning of this parcel. Even if you have a hazmat zoning, 480 gallons or 480 pounds of solvent, is it pounds or gallons? Forgive me for not knowing. That's your max. And that's all you get. And oh no, Emmett's shaking his head. Emmett's shaking his head. I'm wrong.
Yeah, not once you get to the H occupancy. If
you can have
an
more
H occupancy, that allows you to argue for an alternative maximum based on the specifics of your building and environment. But typically it'll be, there are companies such as petroleum companies which handle thousands or even millions of gallons of flammables within a given facility, and they're using that H occupancy, and the same can apply to an extractor.
So if you can have your BHO machine at an oil refinery, you can have as big of a BHO machine as you want. But if you don't have that,
yeah, heavy industrial or general industrial zoning is the first step, and most processors skip over that step when they are looking for a place to locate their processing facility. So many will be constrained
yes.
by zoning. But I have a question in this line of thought that you're going down here, Kat, for Jason, and that is, are there limits in terms of the CO2 handling and the environment for when you're installing a CO2 system, especially a larger one, relating to prevention of asphyxiation and worker safety, that people should be aware of when they're trying to implement? Not just, this applies to all sorts of processes that might be using nitrogen or CO2, even for cooling. But what are some of those safety prevention or safety and hazard prevention factors going into CO2 implementation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I think a lot of times when people talk about the big three extraction techniques, they focus on flammability and things like that, but we're working with compressed gases. We're working with something that could asphyxiate us. So we have monitors that measure CO2 around systems, and if there are elevated levels, even if they're safe elevated levels where you don't need to necessarily evacuate, but it's a good thing to know that levels are higher right now. We've got alarms on our systems that go off, and then if we need to take appropriate ventilation, then we do that. In my time at Thar, running these systems, and we've got 3 systems. Actually, we've got 4 systems that vary in scale that are usually running at the same time, and we have not really hit levels of CO2 escaped because everything's self-contained, and then we're recycling CO2 for future use. So but there are safety controls in place, whether it be people trained on the equipment, how to work with systems that are currently pressurized. That's a big one. And then evacuation plans, or even if it's not that dire, but just what to do if there's a leak or things like that. And like I said, there's monitors throughout our processing floor that we've put there for those safety controls.
Yeah, and it's important. I think a lot of people don't realize that nitrogen will kill you. Nitrogen's will displace oxygen, and you won't. You'll die painlessly and kind of happy, but you'll still be dead. So ventilation's important. It's important to watch these gases, and you do have to deal with very, very high pressures with CO2, but that's why the equipment is rated as such. But to that point, there's no limit on the scalability. And this is now CO2 starts looking interesting because you can scale this up all over the place. Talk to me about that, Jason, and how that's an advantage to your customers.
Yeah, it's an advantage because as things progress in this industry, you might see people no longer being limited to selling within their own state. If there's some kind of law passed that allows states to interact with each other directly, or if there's federal legalization and now you can have one centralized location, your scale might go up a lot. And that's something that bodes well for CO2. We've got systems that process anywhere from tens of kgs per day up to well over a ton per day. We've done that routinely here at Thar. We had a hemp customer that they basically sent us about 300,000 pounds of hemp, and we were cranking out at least 15,000 pounds a week, and that's with not doing any. That's just a 5-day work week. That was on one of our larger systems, but we've built even larger systems than what can go into our facility here. When I first started at Thar, it was kind of neat because they had to build these systems in a shipyard up off of Lake Erie because we couldn't do it here. It was just too massive. And a lot of those systems, it might be premature for cannabis, hemp, not so much. And where we found utility in these types of really large systems is, you mentioned decaffeinated coffee. That's a big one. Also, hops extractions, that's a really big one. Things like valorizing waste products. So, fish oil can come from crustacean and sea byproducts. We've done that. We've done a lot of omega-3s, stuff like that. So supplements where the scale is needed to keep the cost low. And especially when somebody's trying to squeeze out something from waste material, they want to make sure that the cost is super cheap to make it viable to do that. And I think that the scale, our ability to scale up has gone pretty well for that.
A number of my customers who have been operating at scale with CBD hemp are already coming to me and asking to purchase SOPs for THC cannabis processing. And they're really banking on the fact that when this goes federally legal, they're just going to have a different kind of feedstock coming through their very, very high throughput equipment that's already operating in the cannabis/hemp space. Are you finding that that's sort of the thinking amongst some of your larger customers? Are they just focused on hemp, not really thinking about this future pivot possibility?
So I think a lot of the customers that we've sold equipment to have been traditionally cannabis producers, is their main business. Because we were doing tolling here at Thar, we weren't necessarily selling equipment to customers to extract hemp because that was kind of cannibalizing the business that we were looking to get here. Some of the hemp industry was kind of interesting because, in 2019, everybody had hemp. Mountains of hemp. You'd hear people talking about millions of pounds of hemp that they wanted to extract. And then the bottom kind of fell out with that. And a lot of people either were in over their heads, they didn't do market research, they just didn't know what kind of products they wanted to make, but they grew all this hemp. That was kind of the situation in 2020. Recently, there's been an uptick in hemp interest again, and I think we knew it was coming. I think we've figured out many diverse ways to utilize CBD, whether it be in products.
Which one of us is going to say Delta 8 first? I guess I just did it.
You did.
But yeah. I mean, Delta 8 saved hemp's ass. I'm gonna fight me if you don't like it. I think Delta, that turned the market around and I didn't see it coming. Did you see it coming, Jason? Did you know about the miners? I didn't.
I did. And I think I saw it coming just because nobody knew what to do with all this CBD. I mean, when you started to see the types of places that it was being sold at, strip malls and beer distributors, and just I saw, I had heard that a local gun store in Pittsburgh had like an AR-15 on one side and like now selling CBD products on the other side of the sign. So I think, And it started, I mean, when I was teaching the senior citizens, I talked about, CBD date night, where you could get ready using a variety of CBD products, mascara, bubble bath, shampoo, deodorant. You could take your date out to somewhere, I think it was Carl's Jr., who was using a CBD infused mayonnaise so you could get a burger. You could use a CBD toothpick after that. There was CBD popcorn. So maybe you go to a nice movie and you have your CBD popcorn there. There's CBD wine. So you could have a glass of wine maybe with your dinner. And then you could come home at night and you could rest your head on a CBD pillow. And,
that was at 2018. Was that 2018 MJ Biz? The guy with the CBD pillow. I went over and said such mean things to him. I don't even think it was 2019. I think it was 2018. And I'm like, you are the problem. You are my problem right now.
Yeah. And I had heard, I mean, I think that it kind of diluted the reality that CBD has very strong therapeutic properties. But I think that it just became like, less and less of interest. And then you had states that did not have a legal medical or adult use cannabis program. And there was these loopholes, and the loopholes were always kind of fuzzy, but people found ways to convert cannabinoids into things like Delta-8. And so we had a lot of client interest in if our supercritical fluid chromatography systems would be suitable for separating Delta-8 from Delta-9, and they are. Then more, I think.
So say more words. Wait, go back. Say more words about that.
I mean, we have a variety of stationary phases here that we use, just like in any chromatography. You've got some type of bed that you're flowing a solution across, and I always kind of try to liken it to speed dating, where you have there's some interactions that are much longer, and there's some interactions that are much faster. And so you're able to separate out these different ingredients in a mixture. And we've evaluated several stationary phases, and we've been able to nominate which ones we think are more suited for that type of separation. It definitely works, and we're able to purify Delta-8, which is important because a lot of the reactions that people are doing, and not to take away from anybody that's a skilled chemist, or even maybe a self-taught chemist, but is doing things really adequately. But there's a lot of people, and we just did an article with the guys at Orange Photonics. They have the Light Lab system, and they measured a bunch of these new products that have sprung up: THCP, THCO acetate, HHC, and they found that quite a few of them had nothing. And quite a few of them had the precursor molecules that the downstream molecule was supposed to be made from. And there was a lot of unknowns there. And so even if you have a 80% Delta-8 product, what's that other 20%? And we talked with Chris Hudala at Proverde Labs, and he said he's measured something like 6,000 different Delta-8 samples, and they're all contaminated with other things, whether it be Delta-9
and
reaction.
We don't always know what those other things are. Shout out to Jill at Orange Photonics. She's my homie, and I love that product. If you want short jaunt to in-house testing, I think Orange Photonics is definitely worth a look. KCA Labs has been doing excellent work on the Delta-8 testing, that anybody can send them a sample. As I don't know if they're still doing that project, but they had something on the Future Forum where anybody could send them a sample and they would test it. Again, they're finding catalysts, they're finding unknowns, and something that actually this would be really interesting to do. Jason, you and I should go live sometime. Emmett, we should get together and we should talk about how do you read a COA. Because all of these products have a QR code. I mean, I have products on my desk right now that I could look at that, have a QR code, and I could go find out exactly what's in my cannabis. What's really interesting is you read the COA and you're like 80% Delta-8, this, that, the other thing. And then you add it up and it doesn't add up to 100.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it adds up to more than 100. So just because it's I'm not a technical person. I'm a word person who lives in a technical world. And so I see a fancy COA and I see it all there and I make assumptions in my mind. Like, surely all these numbers add up to 100. Well, I've gotten in the habit of just calculating that, like adding that up myself, and they don't. And you go, what's the other 11%? Oh, we're sure it's cannabinoids. Are you though? Because if you were really sure it was cannabinoids, wouldn't it be listed under cannabinoids? So, I think that that's true. Buyer beware with any of this. I think I know that, but again, we're back to where we started in the beginning, and we're talking about the problem of access. When people don't have safe access to this medicine, they are left to buy Delta 8 at gas stations, use the traditional market, which honestly, the traditional market channels in my life are fantastic, and shout out to the traditional market. But I'm privileged in that way where I know the producer. I've been in their lab. I've sold them equipment. I've seen what they're doing. They have my traditional market guys give me a COA. So that's something.
And by that, of course, you mean medical, or California medical market, right?
Is that, if you want me to mean that, Emmett, I will. But I think that the California market is at the point where I'm not, that's a whole other conversation. I'm really happy to shop at a dispensary. I'm happy to support. That's what's on my desk right now. Paper planes. I'll buy that all day long. I sold them, been selling them equipment for 10 years, and I will go and I will pay $50, $60, $80 a gram for their heady stuff. And I'm happy to do it. And California, you're pissing me off, because when I go and do that, my guys aren't getting any money. That's all taxes and overhead and distribution fees and a lot of other things that aren't going back to my processor. But when the supply chain to the consumer, when the route to consumer is so convoluted and messed up, and there are markets where there's no access, medical or adult use, to cannabinoids, enter Delta 8, enter HHC, enter whatever. We created this.
And we're talking about critical issues facing the industry. I think that you're really hitting on one, which is the validation and treating semi-synthetic processes for deriving these minor cannabinoids as, they're chemical manufacturing processes. So when you go to chemical manufacturing processes, you have to validate the process both on upstream feedstock and downstream products, both byproducts and consumer products, and validate your methods in a way that is more similar to fine chemical manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, than a botanical extract or food manufacturing type method. That's the standard of industry, and cannabis is just, and hemp especially, I should say, have not stepped up to the standard that those industries have implemented for decades. So really it goes back to GMP. We need to be thinking about Delta 8 THC manufacturing and these other cannabinoids manufactured by semi-synthetic processes as needing actual validation using very detailed analytical processes that go beyond what your compliance testing providers are able to provide in a lot of cases. There's now specialty labs. ProVerde has done a lot of work. Also, KCA Labs being a great example, as you mentioned before. But that sort of mentality as a business operator in the hemp space, thinking, I'm not going to do this because there's a regulatory burden, right? But I'm going to do this because it's good for my business to have the assurance that I will be able to sell this product into the future because there's no unknown contaminants. That's the mentality that the industry needs to have now, because if we leave it up to regulation on a federal level, or as we're seeing on the state-by-state level now, they will take a stance that will shut down your business if they don't have guidance on what a good example of manufacturing these products looks like.
And Emma, and there's a lot of people that are highly motivated to stomp out the home grow exception, to stomp out micro businesses, to stomp out Delta 8. When Delta 8 gets made illegal in a state, it's not because they think it's dangerous for you. It's because people selling THC in dispensaries have lobbied their butts off to make sure that gets shut down.
It's a collaboration between those with vested interests in THC and the scientific and technical and medical advisors that will agree with them coming to advise the legislature. And it's that second technical part where if you have a validated supply chain where you're validating your manufacturing practices, the results of those manufacturing practices, and then your separation techniques to purify the ingredient you're targeting, those technical advisors to the legislature will be willing to come and side with you.
Right.
You're never going to, convince the THC, manufacturers that Delta 8 isn't competing with them, right? But if you can convince the medical professionals, the manufacturing professionals, the engineers, and the regulators that there is a pharmaceutical style validation of the manufacturing method and the composition of your product, that is much more likely to set a regulatory precedent to allow those products to stay in production. And that's what we're seeing in Michigan. That's what we're seeing in some of these states that are taking a more nuanced regulatory position. They're saying, okay, you want to manufacture Delta 8, we'll give you a venue to sell that. Or you want to manufacture Delta 9 from CBD, we'll give you a venue to sell that. But the regulatory burden of proof for your process of manufacturing those is going to be very rigorous. And if you're not willing to do things like go get advanced analytical methods, partner with potentially academic or state analytical institutions to assist you in your validation studies, you're going to be run out of the business. And also separations, both like what Jason was just talking about with CO2-based chromatography, PrEP HPLC, or alternative liquid-liquid methods like we're bringing to market with Zyput. All of these offer avenues to validated separations of those minor cannabinoids from one another for an actual pure product. And I hope the consumers will start pushing for it as well as they learn
Absolutely.
about the unknowns.
Absolutely. We got a great question from Gavin. Can I read it?
Yes, please.
It says, much like extraction technology, consumer cannabis products have been largely dictated by production capability. I think it's a really excellent insight. Shatter could be seen as the oil vac pump of consumer products, in my opinion. So now that new processing tech is being adapted by cannabis processors, what products are next? I love it. What are the SKUs? At the end of the day, we make SKUs, right? We make things that go. I want Jason, can you answer that? Because I know that you're in touch, like the readers of Terpenes and Testing, the people that you interface with. What are some of the products, novel products that people want to see on dispensary shelves?
So I think that what I think is kind of the future is, and I don't know if this is an actual term or not, but I've heard people use it as like a defined spectrum product, where you're basically deconstructing the plant, separating out piles of molecules and then adding them back together to give an imparted effect. When you look at some of the studies that have been done on cultivars at a dispensary, there was a really nice study out of Nevada where they measured 500 differently named cultivars. And Kat, I remember talking to you about this in Concentration 2019. So sorry for being redundant, but I thought it was a valid point, where they basically reduced these 500 plants to 3 basic chemistries. So Nevada was selling 3 products basically, but they were named 500 different things. And then when you look at some of the studies on the variations in one specific cultivar, like let's say Girl Scout cookies, and you look at Girl Scout cookies from a bunch of different states, or you look at Girl Scout cookies more importantly within one state, there's a lot of genetic variability there. So I think that in Pennsylvania, there's still all of that. We have Punxsutawney Punch and Keystone Kush and things like that, all named, around the state that they probably don't exist anywhere else, or they're just, hybrids that exist somewhere else that we just renamed. But there's also this push to color code things to make things simpler for the end user, but also to impart a specific effect. And that's what I've seen. So there's options for that, to where you could do your extractions and then do some type of purification. That's one of the things that we're doing at Thar that we're pretty excited about, is terpene purifications.
Which is something that CO2 is uniquely great at. CO2 is uniquely great at terpene collection.
Yeah, I mean, we can target the terpenes preferentially up front and then ramp up, our extraction conditions to target cannabinoids. Even if we don't, early on, none of our hemp customers cared about terpenes. And it was awkward for me because I am the editor of Terpenes and Testing magazine. So I'd always kind of want to interject and say, you should care about these. Like, here's money here, and here's medicine. And so we have been generating technology to separate cannabinoids from terpenes using CO2. And when you do distillation, for example, you get terpenes in your trap, and those are often contaminated with some lower levels of cannabinoids. We can separate that. We can purify the terpenes as a group. And right now we're working on some work to use chromatography to separate terpenes even further. But we can do chiral separation. So when you talk about enantiomers, mirror image molecules, oddly, in the terpene world, just the two hands of the molecule have completely different organoleptic properties, and so there's been some interest in being able to separate those out and maybe remove a certain aspect. There's also interest in terpenes for being a useful diluting agent in vape carts. Dr. Robert Strongen out of Portland State University published a pretty interesting paper where they looked at terpene concentrations in dabbable products and toxicants being formed downstream from that. Also looking at terpene concentrations in vape cartridges, and they had divergent effects. With the dabs, the higher the terpene content, the more of these toxicants that were being formed, albeit much lower levels than cigarettes or smoking a joint. And when they had the same type of levels in a vape cartridge, not only was more THC getting into your lungs, but these toxicants weren't forming. So it's pretty interesting work. And I think that kind of heralded this need to be adding terpenes back into formulations. And so I don't know, that's probably a really long-winded and
no, that was great.
I love it. Longtime listeners will know I've said that eventually reconstitution is going to be the name of the game for a lot of products, and that's sort of similar to what you're talking about. Having a target formula, making a broad extract, or just breaking apart an extract into individual components and then reassembling it into a stable and consistent formula from product batch to product batch.
Right.
We're just starting to see that. We've seen some efforts in the past from companies like Choose and I'm trying to think of some Evo labs. I think at one point in Colorado had early products trying to do that, but they've always been hindered by the ability of the total supply chain to support that sort of really finely standardized product that's using all cannabis ingredients and not relying on synthetic terpenes or other terpene isolates. So I completely agree, and I think that's going to extend not only from the dabbable side, but also especially on your topicals side, where fragrance is a really crucial component, but also there are impacts that these non-cannabis ingredients can have on the efficacy of that, but also, of course, on your edibles as well, where that toxicology of the terpenes is somewhat established, but I think has not come to bear on the formulation of cannabis products in general in a really substantive way up to this point, except on the pharma side.
It's a really good point, because I mean, has anybody hit a cart that somebody put way too many terpenes in? It's awful and it's gross and no one likes it. And more terpenes is not always more better. And it can also be toxic. I mean, they can reach toxic levels. So this is chemistry. This is medicine. This is going in people's bodies. Proceed with caution. Do your due diligence, and when in doubt, get help.
I would just add on there too that NCIA has released some literature on guidance for appropriate levels of terpenes in products, and we can also look at the e-cig market. There's guidance there too for certain levels of terpenes. I did a blog about that for Extraction Magazine, because in Pennsylvania, we're 5 years into our medical program, and suddenly the state said, whoa, we better take a look at some of these products, because they were worried about the terpene levels, and people were putting flavorings in there. To my knowledge, you can't get root beer flavor out of terpenes, or like that sort of phony cinnamon. And so people were putting things in there that, some of which, like some of the cinemates, have some toxicities, and there are things you shouldn't inhale. And it was kind of sketchy, because they did not allow it is illegal to smoke flower here in Pennsylvania, but you can vape it. And they made that rule because it got some of the conservative lawmakers to say, okay, well, you don't smoke medicine. And I'm not going to get into like things like 5-MeO DMT here, but that's how they chose to go about it. And so 5 years later, they say a lot of this stuff might not be safe, and it was just kind of head scratching. And there's definitely just, you don't want to inhale certain levels of terpenes. I think that's a really valid point, just because it's something coming from a plant, and we tout its abilities. You hear things about terpenes being good for things like coronavirus. All that's great, but in Pennsylvania, for example, right around when the state started to do this, we have liquid live resin products here that are anywhere from like 0.7% terpenes to 16% terpenes. And like a liquid live resin at 0.7% seems a bit out of the definition of what I would expect a liquid live resin to be. And it was actually a pretty wretched tasting product. And then I wondered, though, like, okay, how can there be such a wide range here from 0.7? And, I'm a nerd about this stuff. So when I buy products and we're lucky enough to have terpenes required on product labels, they're not always the same set of terpenes on the product labels, but I have an Excel spreadsheet that's basically monitoring all these products that I buy and seeing how they've changed over time. And that's something that I've noticed that there's some concern over that now.
Yeah, it's interesting. In answer to Gavin's question, and dovetailing off what you just said, Jason, I really think edibles, technology around fast hitting edibles, it's not all nano. The people that are doing it won't tell you how they're doing it, and they have crazy names for it, but I've had their edibles and they do hit a lot faster. So alternatives, there are people that will never inhale cannabis. There are people that will never smoke a joint, never hit a vape cartridge, never dab. I mean, heaven forbid. I still don't have a torch. I use an iSpire dab device, but you talk about Nancy Reagan's messaging around crack and torches. Like I'm uncomfortable. You know what I mean? I'm as old as the war on drugs. And so I got all that full force, all that messaging. So I think edibles are going to be a much more approachable way. I think we're going to see the market for edibles be good. I think we're going to see edibles with nice full spectrum, high end concentrates in them. And, honestly, my favorite kinds of edibles are edibles that taste like they have weed in them. Like if I want to eat a gummy bear that tastes like a gummy bear, I can go get myself a gummy bear, but I want to know I'm getting all the medicine, and I want to taste those cannabinoids and those terpenes because I know I'm getting it. So I think to Gavin's point, innovations around faster hitting edibles and higher end edibles, I think that's really going to appeal to the mass market.
And
yeah, I definitely agree.
A bit of a prediction. I think that they're patent protected, the manufacturing process at this point, but it's likely, I would think, that we'll start to see cannabis products mimicking oral dose tobacco products, things like pouches and things which are, gum based applications. Okay. I think that it's likely we'll see that at some point. It may take federal legalization for those companies that hold the manufacturing rights to that to come out. But from what we've seen with nicotine, that's starting to be considered a cleaner delivery method than an actual tobacco product using acid forms of nicotine to deliver. So that's one thing I would predict we start to see. And on the edible side, as well as the vape side, I would think that eventually we're going to start to see conversations around terpene and terpenoid type molecules that have low flavor and fragrance profiles being used as dilutants or viscosity control agents, and whether those are going to be allowed in higher concentrations to help to moderate the flavor but keep the consistency right. And also starting to see some products that start to emphasize some of these newly discovered compounds on the terpene or flavor profile, I should say. We're starting to see things like sulfur-based compounds that are being considered a part of the flavor profile. So starting to see products that are tested for those compounds and having them advertised as containing them, I would say, are also likely SKUs we'll start to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's all right. I think that there's two ways to there's three ways to differentiate yourself in a marketplace, right? You're the service leader, you're the price leader, you're the innovation leader. And that's really something. You've got to be one of those things to differentiate yourself. So, there's the innovation side, but then there's also the profitability side. If you can shave some pennies off the process and still be making money, those products are going to continue to sell. And I think that's really where partnering with not just somebody. I mean, what I love about what Jason was saying is he runs this equipment every day. So this is equipment that's actually running and that he's using, and he knows how it works. And challenge your manufacturers, because at this point, if your equipment manufacturer hasn't had the foresight, oh my gosh, I really hope that Emmett has done this because I'm about to say this out loud. But if your equipment manufacturer hasn't partnered with a customer somewhere with a demo lab for you to go see how this stuff works, keep looking. Emmett, please tell me you have a demo lab.
New product demo labs coming soon. You're sort of preceding some announcements here by a little bit, but
it's important though, isn't it? It's important, Emmett, because people want to see it run. And I know how difficult it is because you get a customer who's successfully running it. They don't want to show anybody. And it's very difficult in some states. I mean, Jason's knocking out of the park by doing hemp, but you also are privileged enough to have equipment that's running at a scale where you could justify having some hemp tolling. Like, it's very challenging. But that's one of the things that I would ask someone who is trying to sell me equipment is, can I see it? Can I kick those tires?
Actually, this is an interesting time for a plug. Very soon, we will be doing a demonstration run of distillation and solvent recovery on our XD200 distillation unit in Massachusetts. If you are a customer and you see this within the month of April, interested in coming to see a demo of that technology, please reach out to us as soon as possible, and we'll try and arrange something for you on X-Spiral products. And there are some options for us to arrange demos, although we like to consolidate them into as few times per year as possible at this point, but it is an available option. And HVH 50 demonstration site, we'll have more details for you all soon.
I put you on the spot there, Emmett, which is a crappy thing of me to do, but I'm happy but I had a level of confidence about it because I know the caliber of Sci-Fi Systems, and there's nothing that I'm going to mention that's a great idea that you guys aren't already doing. So I felt pretty confident about it there.
No problem. Yeah. Yeah, we understand the value. Practical application is everything in this business, and the room for unproven technologies is fast disappearing if it is not already disappeared already. So important to focus on new innovative technologies, but also the proof is in the operation.
What's our time like?
Well, actually, we are over time already by about 20 minutes. So, but such a good conversation, such amazing guests today. I figured we would let it run a bit late. And thank you all for being with us today, especially Kat. Thank you so much for guest hosting today. It's been amazing to have you on. Jason, thank you for joining us. I know that your time is very valuable, and so having you on for as long as you have been on has been amazing. I'll let you both say, do you have any last plugs or shout outs you'd like to give before we head out?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation as well as always. I think this is always a nice thing to do, a gathering of minds to talk about the industry, because what we talked about today might not be the same next week, so we might need to reconvene and do it all over again. But I would like to, one new piece of content that we're doing at Terpenes and Testing and at Mace Media at large with Extraction Magazine. So at Extraction Magazine, John McKay has a new podcast that he's doing. So I welcome everybody to check that out. And I've started to do one too at Terpenes and Testing, just called Terpenes and Testing, the podcast. I don't think it's any episodes have aired yet, but we're about 5 episodes in for our recordings, and everything I think has been going quite well. So please visit us at terpenesandtesting.com.
I loved being here, and I want to give a shout out back to Emmett and Edwin, and of course Dr. Jason. You know, this is the caliber of people that you could work with in the cannabis industry if you wanted to. The people that are loudest on Instagram maybe aren't always the ones that are best for your business. The technology that you're familiar with because it's what you have used, or it's what somewhere else you worked with used, or whatever, might not be the best. And let yourself have a week to make some phone calls and hear about some other equipment, hear about some options to, especially if you're looking to scale. Listen to Thar Process, listen to what their crew has to say about CO2, how it could help you. Speak with Emmett and Edwin and talk about membrane technology, all their different add-ons. I mean, there's such a wealth of information at Sci-Fi Systems. It's hard to encapsulate it all. And you know they're doing the good work because they're not spending their time marketing. Sometimes I feel like Sci-Fi Systems is the best kept secret in cannabis. So, you know, you're doing the work, you're doing the engineering, and I really appreciate what you both have brought to the industry over years, over time. This isn't new. This isn't flash in a pan. And it just blesses me to be here with both of you guys. And I love it. I want to do it again.
Thank you so much to both of you again. And this has been the Plants to Plants Hemp and Cannabis Processing webinar. We are going to have several episodes coming up in the next few months. Please follow us on Instagram at Sci-Fi Systems, Facebook, LinkedIn. You'll find scheduled notes for when the next episodes are coming out. Also, sci-fisystems.com. You can find additional information about the Plants to Plants podcast there. We look forward to having you on future episodes. Kat and Dr. Lupoi, absolutely look forward to seeing you again. And of course, let us know if we can ever plug any of the other projects that you're doing. We all have great work that we're doing to put good information out to all of our audiences. So thanks again, everyone, for attending, and we look forward to seeing you on future episodes.